Hello my friends, welcome to this new practical tutorial and welcome to the inference mode where we're going to make our predictions. Two types. First, the predictions of the data points in a test set, and second, the prediction of a single data point with the following feature values. Congratulations again for having your trained model now ready to make predictions. So here we go for the predictions of the data points in a test set. Alright, so there's going to be a bit of action now, because the way to get those predictions is not exactly the same as before. Remember, before we just called the predict method, entered xtest, and voila, we had our predictions. But now, remember that we did something a bit different in data preprocessing, which is of course feature scaling. And what I mean by that is that since the model was trained here on the scaled independent variables, well, it learned how to understand the correlations between the scaled values of the independent variables and the dependent variable, and therefore, well, in the predict method, we must also have the scaled values of the independent variables. And so, what we'll have to do here, and that's the big difference compared to before, is that we will have to scale our independent variables in the test set when applying the predict method on them. Alright, so let me show you how we're going to do this. First, just like before, we're going to create this new variable ypred, which will contain our predictions. Then same, we're going to get our model from which we're going to call the predict method, just like before. But here, in the input, we cannot directly enter xtest, right? The array of independent variables in a test set like we did before, but this time we will have to scale xtest, and that using of course the same scaler that we used on xtrain, because basically we need to have the same scaling as the one that was used to train the model. Okay? Basically the predict method works on the same format as the fit method. Okay? But now, there is something very, very important to understand. When we scaled our array of independent variables in a training set xtrain, what did we do? Let me show this to you again. We used the fit transform method, because I remind that in the fit transform method, two things happen. The fit part compute the average and the standard deviation of your independent variables in a training set, so that it can then scale them using those computations of the average and the standard deviation. And the scaling was done by the transform part. But now we just want to apply the same scaling to xtest, to the independent variables in xtest, but we do not need to compute the average and the standard deviation of the independent variables in xtest. Because if, for example, we use the fit transform method on xtest, well, it would have a different scaling than xtrain, and therefore this would disrupt our predictions. Alright, so it's very important that you understand this. On xtest, we must only apply the transform method and not the fit transform method. So now let's do this. Let's apply this method. What do we have to do first? Well, of course, we have to call our scalar object, which we called, remember, sc, our standard scalar instance of the standard scalar class. And so here we go. We start by calling our object, and from our object we call the transform method, which will take as input exactly xtest. Be careful of the double parentheses here, a first pair for the predict method and a second pair for the transform method. Alright, so there we go. We now have the correct way of making predictions when we applied feature scaling before. So let's do this. Let's run the cell. And successfully run. Now we're going to add a new code cell to just have a look at ypred. Play the cell. And there we go. That's the predictions of our model for all the patients in the test set. So let's, for example, compare the predictions to the ground truth for the 5 first patients. 2, 2, 4, 4, 2. And in the ground truth we had 2, 2, 4, 4, 2. Wow, our model seems to be doing really good, At first sight, it seems that it is able to make really good predictions even on new observations, right? I remind that these are the patients of the test set on which the model wasn't trained. And when we look at the 5 first patients, well, we have a clear round. And we will see if it is the case overall for the whole test set. We will see that, in part 3 when we make the confusion matrix and we get the accuracy, but we should get really good results. Alright, so now let's take a small break, and in the next tutorial we'll do the second type of prediction, the prediction of a single data point.